In 996, the Kingdom of Alençon waged war for the claim that Vannin held on one of its provinces, gained through the blood feud with Lorćan. Proclaiming it too costly to defend, the young king Lorćan the Black gave it to Alençon. With this decision, the bloody wars with Lorćan truly resulted in nothing more than death and anguish for all involved. In the year 997, young Lorćan sought absolution of those sins of his spirit which might cause his misfortune and melancholy at the gracious hand of the Church, and he was indeed granted this peace by Pope Hadrianus II, though he would retain his title of the Black as far as his vassals were concerned. That same year, the Asatru Kingdom of Noregur would declare war on Vannin in a bid to conquer it. Noregur had grown great and powerful in the north, and while reliable maps do not exist during this time period, what is recorded is quite impressive. It is clear why they targeted Vannin in this regard, as the main theological enemy in the region that they needed to totally defeat in order to ensure their security, and therefore the longevity of their faith, was Vannin. King Lorćan the Black attempted to placate them, but when this proved fruitless, he was forced to call upon all the levies in the realm to combat this foreign threat. The collective Vannin army would number roughly 11,000 men. The northern foe made their objective clear when they landed in southwestern Nairn, having unexpectedly sailed all the way around the Isles to get to the rebellious region. 3 ships carrying 3 armies of 3,000 men arrived there, one remaining where it landed and the other 2 meeting at Dublin, which is where the first great battle of the war would take place. The Battle of Dublin was truly a siege, where the Vikings forced their way into port and attempted to break down the walls. While they could have very feasibly remained inside the city and waited them out, the Vannin men inside regardless rushed out to meet them on the 3rd day, and so 6,000 pagans were cut down that day, no match for Vannin steel. What remained of that army retreated to where the other was receiving reinforcements, but the Vannin soldiers were giving close suit. Vannin would lose the ensuing battle, as 14,000 more Norsker troops would land just north of Dublin. Upon hearing of the disastrous state of the war, many Catholic powers flocked to the kingdom's side, even former enemies like Alençon who supported Lorćan, and holy orders like the Knights of Calatrava. King Lorćan the Black, even with the help of these kings, was forced to hire many thousands of mercenaries to balance the tide of war. This new force of 20,000 men faced the Norsker reinforcements just as they completed the siege at their landing area. It was a close and bitter battle, with the Vikings having now taken the city of Brega north of Dublin, but Vannin would only win the day after the collective blood of 15,000 soldiers from both armies commingled in the streets of that city. Their retreating army met with their victorious southeastern one to form another 15,000-man army, which would battle the Vannin forces at Cork in the war's 2nd year. The 2 armies were closely matched, but yet again Vannin achieved another hard-won victory. Heading east in order to stage a counter-invasion by boat, they were engaged before being able to depart, and the 16,000 soldiers in the service of Vannin fought the final battle of the war against 10,000 men under the thrall of Noregur. Vannin would once again claim victory by a slim margin, but this would be enough to cause King Ketelmund the Shadow to accept a white peace. While this stood as a great victory for Christendom, it nearly emptied the coffers of Vannin and devastated countless subjects of the kingdom. While in the years previous, Vannin kings made their way south, slowly conquering several small duchies, Lorćan the Black would now have to first get his financial house in order and allow his people to replace the lost sons of Vannin, before he could go on any exploratory conquests of his own, which wasn't in his disposition to begin with. He got married the day his regency ended in October of the year 1000 to Queen Sybil. His queen was a learned woman and a reformer who prompted Lorćan the Black to revise the ancient and unwritten customs of Vannin, born in that ancient and mystical bog, and recast the realm in the image of mercy and the human spirit. Lorćan the Black enjoyed this idea and sought to strike out on his own in this way, beginning a decade of ambitious reform, including enshrining the rights of certain peasants and limiting the many burdens piled upon them as a caste. Meanwhile, as the sun rose in the year 1000, The conditions of the world were such that it saw the stirrings of dominion across the world, driven mostly by ecclesiastical forces. Generally, in Europe, Catholic kingdoms were beginning to grow as the pagan powers were pushed progressively further north and east. The threatened Eastern Church had secured its future by investing in a narrow range of Balkan leaders, though they were not as successful as the Catholics. From the steppe, various nomads came spilling into Europe, and the Middle East was riddled with infighting, Islam proving an insufficient force to unite the region. In terms of the temporal and political realms, Europe had the most distinct and stable entities in the known world at the time. The Isles, of course, saw Vannin dominating them, though surrounded by challengers of all sorts. In the Iberian Peninsula, Nakarada had swiftly grown to dominate the region, assaulting the Moors on all fronts and reliably pushing them out of Europe. The Gallic region saw great diversity, though Alençon and Aquitaine were the greatest players there, with minor incursion from Nakarada on the southern coast. The Italian peninsula saw Lombardia steadily dominating the north, a healthy papal state firmly projecting its power across Europe and protecting its borders, and Venetia, snaking its way across the Adriatic coast and replacing the desiccated kingdom of Savoy as the major merchant power of the Mediterranean Sea. The Germanic region was a chaotic battlefield between Catholicism and paganism, characterized by the pagan power of the Pulsen League, which had reconquered Bayern, though the Pulsen League was prevented from total dominance by Liubici and the Empire of Denmark. The north was mysterious, though dominated by Noreger, which had its mind set on conquest and determined outward expansion. Eastern Europe was wild, mysterious, and lost to God, a million tribes presiding over the lands, the largest of them being Lietuva on the Baltic Sea. These tribes were suffering a great incursion on their lands from a steppe tribe called the Bilar, and their horsemen were of such unforgiving swiftness that there was little many of the peoples in their path could do. And so the Bilar crept steadily further west. The Balkans were an odd beast, characterized by empire and federations and leagues. The hope of the Orthodox Church, the Magyarország, was effortlessly consuming the Balkan tribes which once called the region home, though some of these tribes banded together with the express purpose of resisting this nascent empire, forming a union in much the same style as the Pulsen League to the northwest, calling themselves the Odissi Federation. The Odissi Federation controlled all trade across the Black Sea and was locked in a life-or-death struggle with the Magyars that was sure to last centuries. Further south, Greece and Anatolia were still fairly disunited, though a certain caste of Greek aristocrats attempted to copy their northern neighbors through the formation of the Attica League, though it remained to be seen if this was going to prove a significant force in the Mediterranean or not. North Africa was still shattered like so many scattered tiles, and the Middle East was comprised of various large but poorly governed realms attempting to project power by any means available to them. And these bickering realms were the Gibelid, who had a network of debtors and tributaries which put them in the best position to administer North Africa, the Taharian, and Khorasan. It was of this world that King Lorćan the Black commissioned a map of for his wife in 1005. This map would come to be known as the Cartographia Sibelia. In 1011, the king found himself faced with impending insurrection led by the Tradition faction, which was boiling over with hatred for his reforms. As such, in order to placate them and protect himself and his family, he changed the succession laws of Vannin specifically back to agnatic, making it so, once again, that only men could inherit, regardless of how many daughters there might be. This change was deemed for the greater good, seeing that the kingdom could not sustain a civil war, and that the lords of the realm had accepted an increase in crown authority a year prior. This was not, however, done for Nairn and Alba, seeing as the Tradition faction operated largely in core Vannin territory under the subtitle of Vannin, and indeed it seemed as though it would be easy to go back on the decision later on if two other subservient titles kept the succession laws that they had. Queen Sybil was upset at her husband, but upon the reception of his marvelous map in 1012, she was more than contented. In 1013, the Pope called the Third Crusade, this one targeting the Arcacid Sultanate, hoping to carve out and establish the Kingdom of Antioch, and it would be this crusade that would be the first that Vannin would directly participate in. King Lorćan boarded a boat for Antioch with 1,750 men in an effort to prove himself in the eyes of God. Later that year, he would be afflicted with gonorrhea, thus affecting his overall health, but regardless, he continued on to Antioch. It is not recorded how he contracted such an illness. The move to join the Third Crusade proved disastrous upon his arrival in 1014, and he returned to Vannin only having stepped foot on their shores for but a moment, given that several Muslim powers in that region flocked to the aid of the Arcacid Sultanate. In 1016, sensing a moment of weakness, the king's marshal Shitrig declared himself true king of Naran and began a revolt against King Lorćan the Black, sparking a civil war. On the 4th of August 1016, at the age of 31, King Lorćan the Black died in battle at the hands of the treacherous rebel Count Blackhair of Mill. The throne of Vannin demanded a male heir, and so his cousin Artur, whom Lorćan once tried to kill to prevent rebellion, rose to the throne at age 38, despite being somewhat indirect. The titles of Naran and Alba demanded the most direct heir regardless of sex, and so this resulted in the titles of Naran and Alba transferring to Lorćan the Black's daughter and only child, Queen Sybil, named for her mother, rending the kingdom of Vannin in half. Truly the sorrowful king's final grand misfortune.